"Mom, apologize to my mother-in-law or get out of my house." That's what my son shouted, standing in the dining room I designed in the house I paid off. His wife stared at her plate. Her mother smiled like she'd already won. I didn't argue. I picked up my bag and walked out. They had no idea the house they were standing in was never theirs to claim. This is last goodbye. Today's story is about a mother who gave her son a home only to be told to leave it by the very people she once welcomed. I have changed the characters' names to protect their privacy. Would you have walked away too? Tell me in the comments. I read them all. The roast was already cooling on the table when Marlene reached across the centerpiece and adjusted the salt and pepper shakers. She moved them 2 inches to the right without asking, then turned back to Sadie to resume her story about a restaurant renovation in Lake Oswego that she claimed was a design disaster until she stepped in. My house, my dining room, had begun to feel like borrowed space. It was a small thing, I know, but the way she adjusted things, glanced at the curtains like they were temporary, spoke as if the house belonged to someone else. It all scratched at the edges of my patience. Beck sat to my left, quiet, his fork pushing peas across the plate. Sadie leaned over to whisper something into his ear. He nodded without looking up. "I think we should talk about next steps," Marlene said, resting both hands on the tablecloth I'd embroidered by hand 20 years ago. "About protecting this home before anything unexpected happens." My pulse quickened. The conversation we had skirted around for months was no longer content to hide behind pleasantries. Beck reached into his messenger bag and placed a stack of papers on the table between the rolls and the butter dish. "It's just some paperwork," he said, avoiding my eyes, "to add me to the deed. You know, for estate reasons, taxes, practical stuff." I kept my voice steady. "I'll have Cassian look at them." Marlene tilted her head. "Elowen, with all due respect, this is what families do. They plan. You've got space you're not using, and Beck and Sadie are raising a child. It just makes sense." "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said, folding my napkin slowly in my lap. "And I'd prefer to enjoy dinner without feeling cornered." Silence. Then Marlene laughed once, short and cold. "Some people don't like letting go, even when it's time." "She's not letting go," Sadie muttered. "She's hoarding control." I turned to Beck, hoping he would say something soften the blow. Take a step back. Instead, he slammed his palm against the table. "Mom," he snapped, voice tight and loud, "apologize to my mother-in-law or get out of my house." Marlene sat back, smiling like a chess player who knew the endgame was seconds away. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I walked to the hallway, picked up my bag, and slipped my keys inside. They didn't know it yet, but the house they thought they'd claimed was already beyond their reach. I shut the door behind me and stepped into the night. The headlights from passing cars skimmed across the windshield as I turned off the main road and into the gravel lot of a roadside motel just past Tigard. I parked beneath a flickering light, killed the engine, and sat for a long moment without moving. My hand stayed on the gear shift like I hadn't yet decided to let go of the wheel. The man at the desk didn't ask questions. I paid in cash from the envelope I kept in my glove compartment, just over $200 for 2 nights, with an option to extend. Room 8 smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and old carpet. The blinds were crooked. The lampshade had a crack running through its seam. I locked the door behind me and slid my bag onto the bed. From the side pocket, I pulled out the blue folder I hadn't opened since the day I signed it. The edges were soft now, dog-eared, from travel between drawers and tote bags and bedside tables. Inside were the trust papers, 16 pages long, drafted by Cassian Doyle and signed 3 weeks ago in his quiet, book-lined office. I had initialed every line just as he instructed, though I'd wondered then if it was all too much, if I was being paranoid, ungrateful, overly cautious. Now the signatures felt like a rope I had tied to the dock before the storm began. The house on High Ridge Drive was listed in full under my name and now legally under the trust. The title, the tax records, the deed, all bound to my living name until the end of it. Rowan had asked for that. After his heart scare long before the cancer came, he sat with me in the kitchen and said, "Whatever happens, I want you protected. Not Beck, not anyone else. You." He had built that house with his own hands, added the sunroom after Beck's graduation, the workshop when he retired early from the lumber mill. We'd spent 29 years paying off that mortgage. We skipped new cars, said no to vacations made due when it would have been easier to borrow. That house wasn't just shelter. It was proof. Beck hadn't shouted at me because of one bad night. He shouted because he thought I had no leverage left. I picked up the motel phone and dialed Cassian's number. When the voicemail beeped, I didn't hesitate. "I left the house tonight," I said. "I need to meet with you tomorrow. Let's talk about next steps." Cassian Doyle's office sat on the 6th floor of a modest brick building near the courthouse, with windows that overlooked the Willamette River, and shelves so full of paperbacks and case files, the wood behind them had faded. He greeted me with his usual calm, his handshake firm, his suit the same shade of charcoal he always wore. I told him everything. The roast, the table, the stack of documents, Marlene's smug silence, and Beck's words. Cassian didn't flinch. He listened with the same stillness he used when reading through contracts. Then he opened the folder on his desk, the trust we had finalized last month, and turned it around so the clauses faced me again. "Everything we discussed is in place," he said. "The house, your retirement accounts, and the certificates of deposit. All secured under your living trust. Your son is listed as a beneficiary, but only after your passing. He has no current claim or legal authority." He flipped to another section and tapped the page gently. "As for occupancy," he added, "you retain full control of the property. They are not tenants, no lease, no rental agreement, no formal arrangement, which means they are in the eyes of the law guests, and guests can be asked to leave." I sat back. The room felt very still. He went on, "We have two options. You can let them stay, though that leaves the door open to further conflict. Or we can draft a formal notice asking them to vacate within a period you choose. 30, 60, 90 days, it's up to you." I thought of the small things I'd brushed off for months. Beck joking to friends that he'd probably inherit the place before he turned 40. Sadie quietly replacing the hallway photos with framed botanical prints that meant nothing to anyone. Marlene calling the house wasted equity. They had stopped asking permission a long time ago. "I want them out," I said finally. 60 days. Send the notice to Beck's personal email and certified to the house. "I want a record." Cassian nodded and began typing. I watched his hands move across the keyboard, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the floor under me start to steady. The envelope waited for him in the middle of the kitchen counter, pale and silent, with Cassian Doyle's name typed neatly in the top left corner. It was the only thing in the house that no one moved all day. Beck dropped his backpack on the floor with a thud, loosened his tie, and pulled the envelope open with a quick tear. His eyes moved down the page as Sadie came in from the living room, still holding Mateo on her hip, half a cracker crumbling in the toddler's fist. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then he read it out loud. "Notice of termination of informal occupancy. 60 days to vacate. No lease. No right of retention. All property decisions fall under the living trust established in Elowen Price's name." Sadie blinked. "She's kicking us out." Beck said nothing. Sadie took the letter and read it again herself. "She can't do this." From the hallway, Marlene appeared, drying her hands on a dish towel. She looked at the letter, looked at both of them, and smiled tightly. "This is a bluff," she said. She's posturing. No judge is going to evict a young family from a home where they're raising a child. Not for a woman who can live anywhere. That house is too much for her. She'll come to her senses. Beck stared at the letter again. The words weren't changing. He tried calling. Once, twice, 3 times. Straight to voicemail. That night, after Mateo had finally fallen asleep and Sadie sat silently scrolling through apartment listings on her phone, Marlene poured a glass of wine and told Beck to find a lawyer. "She's been manipulated," she said. "Something's off. This isn't the Eloan I knew." "She's tired," she added, after a pause. "Maybe she's not thinking clearly." Beck texted me around midnight. Then again. You're abandoning us. You're choosing money over your grandson. You left your only child. I sat in the motel armchair with the messages lighting up the screen. I didn't reply. In the morning, I would wait for Cassian to tell me what came next. They went together. Beck and Marlene to a law office in a commercial plaza near Lake Grove, one of those places with glass walls and soft jazz playing in the lobby. I wasn't there, but Cassian filled me in later. The attorney they met was sharp, gray-haired, the kind of man who doesn't bother with small talk when the paperwork is already in front of him. He reviewed copies of the trust and Rowan's will, both filed and recorded, long before Beck ever moved back in with me. The attorney's conclusion was simple and direct. "The documents are clean," he said. "The trust is irrevocable, the ownership transfer is recorded, and there is no indication of undue influence or cognitive decline. These weren't rushed. They were prepared years ago. Challenging this would cost you tens of thousands of dollars and would very likely fail." Marlene didn't accept it easily. She pushed harder, suggesting that perhaps I hadn't been in a clear state of mind, that maybe I'd been isolated or pressured or misinformed. The attorney didn't blink. "If you file based on mental incapacity," he warned, "you'll need proof. Medical evaluations, testimonies. And if those claims fall apart under scrutiny, it could expose you both to liability for harassment or elder coercion." After that, there wasn't much left to say. Beck didn't speak much during the meeting, but when they left, he sat in the parking lot in his car for over an hour. The sun dropped below the strip mall across the street, and still he sat there, hands on the wheel, engine off. Meanwhile, I met Cassian again in his office. The second notice had been sent. The certified receipt was confirmed. "I'm thinking of finding a small place to rent," I told him. "Somewhere quiet. 1 bedroom, nothing fancy." He nodded. "If you do decide to rent or sell the house, the trust allows you full authority. No one else can contest it, not now, not later." He reminded me that the protections Rowan built were now permanent. I had taken that final step, the one you don't undo. Walking back to my car, I understood something I hadn't let myself admit before, that keeping the house might cost me my son, even if I never wanted it to. The apartment sat above a florist's shop, tucked between a sewing supply store and a bakery that smelled like burnt sugar every morning. It wasn't new, but it was clean, with tall windows that looked out over a shared garden filled with raised beds and mismatched lawn chairs. I signed the lease for 1 year and paid the deposit with a check written slowly, as if each stroke of the pen marked a turning point. I moved in with only what I needed: a small oak table, 1 bookshelf, 2 chairs mismatched but sturdy, a narrow bed with a handmade quilt I refused to leave behind, and 1 framed photo Rowan in his work apron, standing beside a 12-year-old Beck, both of them covered in sawdust and smiling like the world was brand new. As I unpacked, I found myself hesitating over things that once seemed essential: the holiday serving platter, the carved candle holders from our 25th anniversary, the old piano bench no one had played in years. I left them all in storage. Without the house, they felt like stage props for a life already ended. That night, I sat at my folding table, the kettle still warm beside me, and opened the envelope Cassian had given me. Inside were copies of the past year's bank records, highlighted and sorted by date. I hadn't realized how often I'd said yes. Just under $800 for car repairs, $450 for groceries, nearly $6,000 in credit card payments spread out over months, labeled catching up and temporary. There were texts too polite but urgent. Sadie asking if I could help cover their electric bill. Beck apologizing for another bounced check. I thought I was helping. Maybe I was. But looking at the numbers, it felt like something else. I closed the folder and set it aside. No more transfers. No more quiet rescues. What I had promised through Cassian, I would honor. Nothing more. I made a sandwich, lit a small lamp, and sat at the table alone, wondering how Beck would navigate the world once the ground beneath him stopped being mine. The garage door groaned open and closed each evening now, but not for my car. Boxes appeared in uneven stacks beside the water heater. Some new, some borrowed from the grocery store on 14th. My name was still on half of them. A box labeled kitchen. Hers sat with its lid caved in one of the teacups inside, broken clean through the middle. Nobody had asked what I wanted to keep. The days moved fast after that. The silence between us stretched, but the deadline held firm. 40 days, then 30, then 25. I imagined Sadie making lists, checking leases, calculating square footage against strollers and high chairs. I imagined Marlene standing in the hallway, arms folded, offering nothing but opinions. Cassian forwarded the delivery confirmation to my email. The certified notice had been signed by Beck himself. Marlene, from what I heard, called it theater. She'll come to her senses, she kept saying. She's a widow, not a tyrant. No judge will let her force a young family out of their generational home. But it wasn't their home, and I wasn't performing. Sadie started to change. It wasn't loud, just quieter than before. She stopped smiling at Marlene's jokes. Her voice dropped when Beck raised his. I heard from a neighbor that she'd walked out of the house one afternoon in tears and sat in the car with Mateo for almost an hour just watching the traffic. One evening, Sadie stood outside the guest bathroom and overheard Marlene on the phone. If Beck had pushed harder, Marlene said, her voice clear through the air vent, we wouldn't be losing this house. He folded too soon. That same night, Beck called me again. He didn't shout this time, but his voice cracked. You chose a piece of paper over your grandson, he said. Over me. You'll be alone, and we'll be out on the street because you decided to draw a line in the sand. I let the message finish and sat at my kitchen counter, the phone resting beside the folder, with the trust documents, my thumb tracing the edge of the cardboard. The grief came quietly, like smoke. Still the next morning, I emailed Cassian with a decision: if Beck found a place within his income, I would cover 3 months' rent directly to the landlord, and nothing more. A lifeline, not a reversal. It was all I could offer without undoing the only protection I still had. Cassian called me midweek with a short update. Beck had finally responded. He hadn't contacted me directly. Instead, he called Cassian asking if the rent offer was still on the table. Cassian relayed my conditions again: 3 months paid directly to the landlord, lease in Beck's name, modest and reasonable. He was cold at first, Cassian said, then quiet. He didn't say thank you, but he didn't hang up either. For a few days, nothing moved. Then, just before the 60 days were up, Cassian forwarded me a signed lease, an apartment off Hawthorne, older building, 2nd floor, $850 a month. A direct deposit receipt followed less than an hour later. I didn't cry, but my hands stayed still for a long time after I set the phone down. Moving day came gray and unremarkable. A neighbor texted me a photo: Sadie holding Mateo, his small legs wrapped around her hip, a cardboard box balanced against her shoulder. Beck walked behind them, head down, carrying 2 more boxes. They passed the front porch without looking up. The trellis Rowan built years ago still hung crooked where the vines used to bloom. Marlene was there, of course, barking instructions, dismissing the apartment as transitional, and reminding Beck within earshot of the neighbor that they would fix this soon enough. But I heard later that she went home before the sun set, that she didn't lift a single box, that she didn't return the next day. Cassian confirmed the landlord received the first 3 checks and that Beck signed all the paperwork himself. My part was done. No more bridges to hold up. No more rescues. I received the locksmith's invoice that afternoon. The house was empty. The locks had been changed. The spare keys were mailed to me in a plain white envelope with a tracking number. I sat at my small apartment table, the trust binder beside me, and a yellow notepad open to a short list of local property managers. I circled 2 names and picked up the phone. The next decision at least would be mine. The knock came just after 3 short raps that didn't wait for hesitation. I set my tea aside and walked to the door, uncertain whether to expect a neighbor or a mistake. Beck stood in the hallway, thinner than I remembered. His jacket was unzipped, one sleeve half off his shoulder. His hair looked slept on. His collar wrinkled, his eyes the color of rusted iron. I opened the door, fully stepped back, and said nothing. He walked in without asking. I didn't offer tea. He didn't look like he'd take it. "I'm not here to fight," he said, voice rough. "Sadie's tired. She's not saying it, but I think she regrets listening to her mom. Mateo's teething again. The walls are thin. The neighbors fight at midnight, and I work through lunch just to cover rent. Marlene comes around less and less, says she can't stand the smell of the stairwell, says I didn't push hard enough when it counted." He looked around my apartment. The single lamp, the books on the floor, the quilt over the arm of the chair. He exhaled sharply. "I need a break. If you could undo the trust even temporarily, I could refinance the house. I could fix this." I walked to the desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the 1-page summary Cassian had printed for me. I slid it across the table. Beck didn't pick it up, just stared at the text like it might rearrange itself into something he wanted. "It's locked," I said. "You'd need my death or a judge's order. Even I can't touch it without unraveling everything." "So that's it," he snapped. "You keep all of it." "You win." I didn't flinch. "It's not a game. It's protection. From the choices you've made, from Marlene's voice in your ear, from the slow erosion of who I used to be in my own home." Beck stood for a long time. He didn't argue, but his silence wasn't apology, it was collapse. He walked to the door, then stopped just short of the threshold, his hand resting on the knob. "You've changed," he said quietly, and I had. The changes arrived in pieces like newspaper clippings without dates. Cassian mentioned in passing that Beck still had his job, but a planned promotion had been quietly withdrawn. Something about inconsistent hours, missed meetings. He hadn't been fired, but the ceiling had lowered above him. Sadie, on the other hand, had started taking on marketing work from home projects she could fit between naps and snack times. Her voice on the phone when I overheard it at the florist downstairs sounded more certain than it ever had in my dining room. Marlene drifted to the edges. Her visits became rare and brittle. She complained of stress, of minor ailments, of financial strain that she blamed on everything except her own ambition. She no longer mentioned flipping houses. She no longer mentioned anything about mine. My own life settled like fresh snow. I joined a reading group at the library. Small, mostly women my age, some retired teachers, a former nurse who brought ginger candies in a tin. I volunteered on Thursdays during Children's Story Hour, organizing craft bins and straightening plastic chairs. The courtyard below my apartment bloomed in spring, and the neighbors began to call me by name. We shared soup recipes and swapped herbs clipped from window boxes. I worked with a property manager to list the old house. A young couple with twin girls signed the lease. They planted tulips in the front yard and hung wind chimes near the back gate. The house turned into something quiet and useful, no longer a battleground or a bargaining chip, just a home again. On my 64th birthday, a plain white envelope arrived in the mail. Beck's handwriting was unmistakable. The letter inside was short. No apologies, not exactly. But he wrote that the past few months had shown him someone he didn't like, someone who expected rescue and resented the absence of it. He said he was trying to raise Mateo differently, trying to teach him how to build instead of wait, trying to become the man he wanted to believe he already was. I read it at the kitchen table, the late sunlight stretching across my volunteer log and the rental ledger. Something in my chest loosened, though it didn't vanish. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the older photographs. Rowan on the porch, Beck with dirt on his knees. The family we once were. Then I picked up the bowl I'd prepared, wild rice and roasted squash, and stepped into the courtyard where chairs were already being arranged for dinner.